Welcome to the 194th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with R S Belcher, author of the Six Gun Tarot and the Shotgun Arcana. Stay tuned for the interview. Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is R S Belcher, author of the Six Gun Tarot and the Shotgun Arcana, which was just published. Rod, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's very nice to be here.
Great. Well, can I have you read a page or two from your new novel, The Shotgun Arcana?
I will be happy to. I'm probably going to trip over it a little bit, so bear with me. But yeah, I'll be glad to. This is the second chapter. It's called Judgment. I'll read a couple of pages. It's sort of an introduction to the first chapter is a little bit of a flashback. The second chapter is sort of introducing you to the town of Golgotha, which is pretty much a very major character in both the books. Judgment. 23 years later, November 18th, 1870, Nevada. The moon was a bullet hole in the sable night, bleeding ghost light across the wasteland of the 40-mile desert. The 40-mile was part of the price you paid for the West. That price was often paid in blood and tears, and yet they still came. Headed west, headed just a little ways further out, away from safety and rules and meaningless lives and anonymous deaths. They were lured by promises of gold and silver. Others came for the visions of a new world, a new life in a land big enough for everyone to have dreams. Some came hacked and hewn, inside or out, from the war, from the madness and the carnage, because they had nowhere else to go. They all headed west, where luck and fortune still flowed like milk and honey, and where your fate wasn't set in stone. You could be a hero, a villain, a self-made man, or you could vanish without a trace, erasing the person you once were. But first there was the crossing, there was the 40-mile, and other places just like it. Many met the crucible of the desert and failed. The floor of the wastes were littered with the bleached bones and artifacts of lives lost in the attempt. A soul would need to be crazier than a snake in the sun to leave behind civilization and kin, home and hearth, to travel for months in a wagon or on horseback to a land still more myth than reality, full of gunslingers and savages, outlaws and madmen, sickness, wild animals, and spirit-crushing loneliness. And still they came. Hope is a powerful drug. The moonlight washed onto the shores of the desolate, murderous land and found at the very edge of the 40-mile a town. Huddled in the cradle between two small mountains, the town waited. She waited for those strong enough to endure the initiation of the 40-mile. She waited for those seeking solace or redemption or anonymity, the blessed and the damned. Golgotha waited with open arms, embracing the night. On the rooftops of Golgotha, two shadows pursued a third across the Dove's Roost, a house of ill repute tucked away from the sanctity of Main Street behind Golgotha's largest saloon, the Paradise Falls. One of the pursuers began to close the gap, and the other shouted out in frustration and redoubled his efforts. "Mutt! Hey, Mutt!" Jim Negri shouted, panting as he sprinted as fast as he could across the uneven and partly unstable roof of the cat house. "Dang it, Mutt! I ain't got no four-legged kin in my blood. Wait for me." Jim was 16. His sand-colored hair whipped in the desert's night's cold wind. His eyes were bright, but also old. He had his father's six-gun holstered on his belt and a silver deputy star pinned to his vest. A small leather pouch tied by a leather cord around his neck bumped and jumped against his chest. The pouch held his dead father's jade eye. Jim's boots thudded like hammers as he gave all he could to catch up with his partner. Jim's partner was a blur, thin as a whip and twice as fast. His hair was longer than Jim's, falling to his shoulders, oily and black. His battered leather Stetson had fallen off his head and jumped against his back, held on by a stampede cord. The man was an Indian, with a thin, pointy nose that showed signs of having been broken a time or two. The thick black eyebrows above his crooked nose grew together, and his narrow face was marred with scars and pockmarks. His teeth were yellow and crooked, but his incisors were straight and prominent. He carried a pistol strapped to one thigh, a huge knife strapped to the other, and like Jim, he wore the silver star of a deputy. His people denied him a name. He called himself Mutt. "Come on, lazy britches," Mutt shouted back over his shoulder, grinning. "I'm only using 2 legs, and besides, I'm tired of chasing this damn thing all over town. I'm of a mind to catch it tonight." The shadowy figure they pursued was small, perhaps 4 feet tall, and was moving at remarkable speeds with an odd gait more reminiscent of a penguin's waddle than a man running. The pursued approached the edge of the dove's roost, turned back to regard Mutt and Jim with glowing red eyes, possessed of pupils of green fire. The thing hissed at the deputies and then leapt, almost flew, across the gap between the dove's roost and the roof of the boarding house next door, run by Mr. and Mrs. Scuddy. The thing spread its arms as it jumped, and wing-like membranes under each arm extended to allow it to catch the night wind and glide to the next roof. Its taloned feet hit the roof, and it scampered to disappear into the darkness again. "It's got wings," Jim muttered to himself. "Of course it has wings. Like hell, I'm letting some flying whatever the hell that is get the better of me," Mutt yelled. "Mutt, don't!" Jim shouted, but it was too late. Mutt increased his speed and launched himself across the gap between the roofs with a yip and a yell that would have put a gray coat rebel to shame. He hit the other roof, rolled, and came up running and laughing. "Ah, damn it," Jim muttered as he picked up speed. He reached the edge of the roof, jumping for all he was worth. He landed on the roof of the boarding house barely, his feet scraping and slipping on the weathered and cracked wooden shingles, almost falling backwards and down 3 stories to the floor of the narrow alley below. Jim steadied himself. He saw some movement in the darkness of the alleyway. 2 figures, cloaked by night, shifting, grappling roughly. He thought he heard a woman's cry out just for an instant. Jim paused, peering down into the now silent alley, struggling to pierce the shadows, straining to hear. He looked up to call out to Mutt, but the deputy and the creature were nearing the edge of the boarding house roof, both fully engaged in the pursuit. The creature had veered toward the southern side of the roof and sprung out again, its weird arm wings spread. It landed easily on the roof of the Elysium Hotel and waddled off at a breakneck speed, hissing and growling. Mutt was already preparing to spring after it, his thin legs churning and his arms pistoning as he prepared to leap. "Come on, boy, you're going to miss all the fun," Mutt shouted, and then howled as he flew through the air. Mutt landed in a crouch, popped up, and kept running. Jim gave one last glimpse into the narrow, seemingly empty alley. All he could hear now was the raucous banter of the Dove's Roost clients and ladies. The roost was always noisy at night, most likely nothing to fret over. Still, something tugged at him. He heard Mutt whoop again as he pursued the monster. The alley would have to wait. Jim sprinted after Mutt and the creature. He tried not to think about the fall and the impact if he slipped or fell. He wondered how his late Pa would have handled this, but that thought was of little use to him now. Pa would never have gotten himself into this kind of fool mess in the first place. Jim laughed at the thought and flung himself into space, chasing after his friend and the thing they both hunted. And that's probably a good place to stop.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your new novel, The Shotgun Arcadia, yet, how would you describe it?
It is. It's my second book. It is a sequel to my first book with the Shotgun Tarot, and it's basically they're weird Western stories. They're set in a small town at the edge of this desert, which was a real trail for folks heading west, the 40-mile desert in Nevada. Golgotha is a town where my goal when I wrote both of these books was to make it a town where everyone had a story or a secret. Supernatural forces seem to gather in Golgotha quite often, and those forces seem to attract people to Golgotha that are the best kind of people and the worst kind of people. And the reason why Golgotha is like this beacon for sort of paranormal events and entities and for really sort of saints and sinners is explained in the first book in Shotgun Tarot. The second book picks up about Shotgun Arcadia, the one that just came out, which incidentally just released today in the UK through Titan Books, and I'm very excited about that, and has a very cool cover. The Titan company publishers have used a different cover than the American cover, and it has a very kind of a traditional tarot card feel to it. But basically, in the Shotgun Arcana, we're picking up a year after the events of the first book. However, I did try to write them both so that you could read one or the other and not have to feel like you're lost or need a lot of backstory to explain what's going on. But um, the town of Golgotha is experiencing a boom. The silver mine that had been closed in the first book has been reopened. You have folks coming in, pouring into town, and the town has literally doubled in size in the past year. And you start having some crimes occur, some murders of what they would call working girls, prostitutes, and that is one of the main story arcs that's happening. Is the girls are being hunted down and murdered in very horrific ways. The sheriff and his deputies, Sheriff John Highfather, who is a gentleman who has a reputation for not being able to be killed, whether it's true or not, he cultivates it because it's good for business. And his two deputies, who you met briefly in the little part I read there, who has an interesting parentage. He's related to the Native American spirit Coyote. He's one of Coyote's sons, actually. And then Jim Negri, the young boy there. Jim is sort of our gateway character from both books. He's a relatively normal guy. He is on the run for something that happened to him back home in West Virginia, and made his way to Golgotha. A lot of folks in Jim's situation seem to find their way to Golgotha. And the three of them are trying to find who's killing these women and why. And there's another story arc that pretty much encompasses the whole town, that involves a cult of basically serial killers, cannibalistic serial killers, who are drawn to Golgotha by this artifact that they're seeking out. That Golgotha seems to hold a lot of kind of occult treasures and knowledge, and this one has a history. In the first chapter, actually, you find out it has something to do with the Donner Party about 20 years earlier, and then this group is coming to town, and it's sort of a high noon kind of a feel to it. Sort of the showdown's coming. There's something's going to have to be resolved. These very, very bad, dangerous people are coming to Golgotha, and it's literally an army of them against a couple of the sheriff and his deputies, and a couple of the folks in town who tend to rise to the occasion to help defend their town. They did in the first book, and they do it again in their second. So it is a Western. I've tried very hard to make it as if you're expecting a typical Western, I'm hoping you'll be disappointed. I've tried to make it. It bends genres quite a bit. There's horror. There is Western. There's romance. I tend to throw a little. I don't mean to, but it seems to just kind of happen that way. I throw a little philosophy in there, and I try to have a lot of fun. That's one of my big goals when I'm writing anything I'm trying to sell. But anything I want someone else to read, I want it to be fun for them as it is for me. So hopefully this will be a good adventure. I try to put a lot of work into my characters. While they may seem on the surface somewhat stereotypical, the kind of crotchety deputy, the square-jawed sheriff, and that sort of thing, all of them have secrets, and they have backstory that make them different than what you expect them to be. And that's my goal. So I hope folks will come out and check it out. I would be very thankful if you give it a read. I would love to get feedback from people who do read. Please let me know what you think, good or bad. Either way, I'm happy to get it. But that's pretty much my summary of Shotgun.
Great. Well, do you remember, was there an initial idea that inspired you to write the Shotgun Arcana in the first book, The Six Gun Tarot?
Actually, it kind of the initial idea started probably over a decade before Six Gun was ever published. I had this idea of doing sort of a existential horror Western kind of thing. I wanted to do something that dealt with like the isolation of these little towns in the middle of nowhere. And I was a big fan of some of a lot of the Clint Eastwood Westerns, Pale Rider, and I'm trying to think what the one is where he tells the guy to come in and paint the town red. High Plains Drifter. High Plains Drifter blew me away because it was the first time I'd ever seen kind of a supernatural, very subtle supernatural element worked into a Western, and I really fell in love with that idea. Um, and so I was kicking around wanting to do something with a kind of a horror western was my initial idea, and I had tinkered around with it. I'd written some, I had some like characters in mind. I'd kicked some things around. I've written a few chapters. Initially, the sheriff was supposed to be the kind of the hero and your gateway character, your protagonist, and it just left me really flat. So I had all this stuff kind of sitting there, and I put it away and got on with life. I wrote a whole other novel that never sold, and for good reason.
What was the genre of that novel?
That was urban fantasy, and I have not entirely like any good parent. I've not entirely given up on my child. I am. I may try to resurrect it at some point. I have used scraps and bits of it from in other things, but it was an urban fantasy. It was called Crusaders Blues, and it was basically a modern uh, incarnation of a secret order of knights who were fighting this monstrous kind of uh, very nebulous organization that was abducting children. I had this very weird dream. That's where the idea for the novel came from. It was this weird dream where it had to do with all the children on milk cartons and on little posters at Walmart and things like that. And it's all these missing kids, and somehow or other in my brain it percolated that there was some horrible force kind of taking all of these children. It wasn't just like one petty little evil person here and one petty little evil person there. It was some massive thing directing all of these petty little evil people. And I haven't given up on it. I'm actually used some characters out of it and some of the ideas for some of the things that I'm writing now that Tor's purchased. And I've still kind of woven that universe into the stuff I'm writing as far as urban fantasy goes. So maybe it'll pop up one day. But I tried writing it. I was very happy with it. It got rejected a few times, and I was. We had just had. I'm divorced now, but at the time, my wife, my well, ex-wife, but my wife and I had just had our first child, and that's a busy time for you. So I basically kind of finished it, which I was very happy about. But I put it on put it away in a drawer and said, well, along with all these other notes and ideas for stuff, including what would eventually become Six Gun Tarot, and jump ahead several years, and I managed to be very fortunate to win the grand prize in a Simon and Schuster Star Trek contest. For a thing called Strange New Worlds, which was they would put up this anthology series where they would invite people who were not professional writers to submit. You won the prize is where they publish your work. You get a a legit credit for writing something, and they pay you a very good rate for the story. And that was something I wrote just because I'd never written a Star Trek story before. I love Star Trek, and I thought, I'll give it a try and see what I can do. And as almost like a writing exercise, I'll write a genre piece in somebody else's world and see how it goes. And I had kind of given up. I didn't think I was going to have anything happen with it. And I got a phone call a few days after New Year's. I guess this would have been probably 2006. From one of the editors with Simon and Schuster saying that I had not just gotten into the anthology, but I won the grand prize of the anthology, which made me very happy and got me very excited. And I had been making a living as a freelance writer for several years, basically writing for magazines, newspapers, and things like that, and making a living at it. And it really got me excited that I had been trying to sell some short stories, and and you get a little discouraged when it's like you after a hard day of working, you come home and there's a rejection letter waiting for you. So it kind of got me jazzed up to get into it again. And I was going, you know what? If I can win this contest and I can get in this book, I can get a novel written. So I had a bunch of different ideas, and the one that really stuck with me the most over the years was this freaky little Western. So I started working on the Six Gun Tarot, and that's really where the idea came from. Is it had been floating around for a while, and actually I think the time it took to kind of get to a place where I could write it helped it a whole lot, because I changed a lot of the stuff in the book. I mean, the core of it is still the same idea, the same premise I wanted, but almost everything else changed, and for the better, I think. So that's when the idea kind of popped up in my head.
That's great. Well, prior to working on that urban fantasy and prior to writing the Star Trek short story, had you written other short stories? And what was kind of your entree into writing fiction? How did you first get interested in it?
Oh, to be really honest, I have wanted to storytell since I was as soon as I could really kind of like articulate. I used to, I grew up with my father passed away when I was very young. My mom, bless her heart, raised my sister and I by herself. She was a working mother, and like in the summertime, I would go and go and stay with her at work. I didn't really have an option there, and I was a huge science fiction fantasy kid. I was a I think I came out of the womb as a geek, and very proud of that. Very happy about that too, because I just one of my earliest fondest memories is sitting on my mom's lap and she's reading an Avengers comic to me, and it just she was always very, even if she didn't understand this stuff, she was very encouraging of me being into the things I was into and being creative. So I would write these little comic books. I'd draw pictures and write dialogue and come up with stories on loose leaf notebook paper. And then I'd take a little bread tie and loop it through the hole in the loose leaf paper. And my mom was a beautician. She owned her own beauty shop. And I would walk out and I would show these off to my mom, and I'd show them off to her customers. And they were like Star Wars comics and Star Trek and Avengers, Batman, Spider-Man, just anything I was into. And the ladies would sometimes I started putting like a little price on the cover, like a little Comics Code Authority seal and price 25 cents. And these ladies, bless their hearts, would buy these things for 25 cents. So I've been a paid writer since I was about 9 years old, which is kind of awesome. But I always loved storytelling. These great mythological characters, and I'd always want to know what happens next, or wouldn't it be cool if this happened? And I was very fortunate. I had a cousin. His name was Gary Weddle. Gary was very supportive of me. He was always very encouraging. A lot of times when you have a young kid, and they get excited about something, sometimes it's hard to match that enthusiasm or to properly cultivate that enthusiasm. And Gary did that. And so I started writing stories. I had my mom, bless her heart, when I turned 13, she bought me a typewriter for my birthday, and that was the greatest present I think I could ever get. And I thanked her so many times for that over the years. So I wrote, and actually the earliest things I wrote and this was before there really was an urban fantasy genre, at least not in the mainstream. I was writing stuff about people in the modern day encountering bizarre supernatural stuff and trying to cope with it, and in the case of the nasty supernatural stuff, trying to keep it from hurting other people. I've still got those stories locked away in a trunk somewhere, and I hope they never ever see the light of day, because they're pretty horrible. But I loved them. I loved doing it, and life kind of gets in the way a lot of times of and also, to be honest, it's very hard to make a living as a writer. It's not an easy thing to, if you hit big and hit that jackpot, yay. And I have made a living as a writer through a lot of hard work and a lot of clients. I mean, if you really want to do it and you're determined to do it, you'll make it happen. You may never hit the big time, but you'll write what you want to write, and it'll make you happy, and that's good. And I did a lot of other things before I came home to writing. And I'm very glad I did come home to writing. We were expecting our second child, and I had kind of tinkered at writing. I'd written this manuscript that nothing came of it, and I'd messed around some, but I needed to make a living at it, something. We were in a position where we had 2 kids, and the business that we owned had closed, so it was like I needed to make some money. And I really wanted to write, and I wanted to become a better writer. So I went into nonfiction journalism, and And my ex-wife, to her credit, was very supportive. She was like, as long as we can pay the bills, you go for it. If that's what you want to do, go for it. And I did. I wrote for several newspapers. I was editor of a newspaper. Wrote for a lot of magazines, including if you ever heard of Starlog magazine.
Yes.
I actually did an article for Starlog. It was one of my first published magazine articles, and I was on the moon. It was so cool. I got to do an interview with David Drake, and it was a big piece they did in there. I was very happy with it. But I know I'm kind of meandering a little bit, but basically, I I wanted to write since I was a very young kid, and it kept popping up in my life. It was like anytime I would have a little spare time, I'd be tinkering with some story or some storytelling idea that I had, and it just kept coming back to me and coming back to me. And I'm thankful for the time as a nonfiction writer, because I really think that helped me with my skill. And I learn something new every day. I'm still learning so much about the craft of writing, and I always will. I think it's not something that that you don't ever stop learning something about. But the journalism part of it, I think, helped me with clarity, brevity, and basically conveying information quite a bit. And I'm in debt to the folks who let me write for them and were nice enough to pay me for that. And but I've been wanting to do it since I was a kid, and I still am waiting to wake up and find out this isn't real.
well, given your writing journey and leading up to the publication of the Six Gun Tarot and now the Shotgun Arcana, what advice would you have for someone who may be listening, who kind of was in your place 10 years ago and would like to have their own novels or short stories published? What advice would you offer?
I've actually spoken to a few classes. There's a Southwestern Virginia Writers Conference down here that they're very nice. They asked me to speak the last couple of years, and you get asked this a lot. And I really, looking back at my own experience, and I'm actually looking at the experience I'm having today, never give up. Never surrender. Never give up. No, never give up. You have to be basically 2 parts prize fighter to every 1 part writer. You have to be able to be like Rocky and get knocked down. There's nothing worse than coming home after working some job that you really can't stand for practically no money, and you schlub home and it's raining and you're cold and you're tired, and you still have at least maybe a couple pages worth of manuscript that you want to bang out, and you open your mailbox and there's a rejection letter. It will break you if you let it. You can't let it break you. If you're writing, you write because you love it and because it's just in your skull and you want to get it out. If you get published, that's great. But if you go into it and that's your sole goal, you'll be unhappy, and there's no reason to be unhappy. If you can write stories and you love them and they make you happy and you share them with other people and they like them and it makes them happy, you're doing it right. Just if you want to be published, and everybody wants to be published, and I'd be a hypocrite if I said it isn't awesome to get published, but if you want to go that route, then you have to be able to take criticism. You have to be able to take rejection, and you're going to get a hell of a lot more of that than you're ever going to get of praise. I mean, if you're lucky, at some point it balances out a little bit. But you just very briefly, one of the anecdotes I kind of throw out here is, I had a dear friend, and he received. We had a little writers workshop we were doing for a while. And he had written this story, and he actually got the nerve up to send it to Weird Tales, which is, a huge, legendary magazine. So many, just fantasy, horror, science fiction gods got their start in Weird Tales. And he gets back this 6 or 7 page handwritten letter from the editor. And it's talking about how, well, we're not going to buy your story, but here's the things I really liked about your story. And then here are the criticisms I have about it. And here's what I think you might want to change, or try writing it this way instead of this way. And at the end, it has the words that every writer longs to hear. Why don't you try this again and send it back to me? And that's, editors, have so much coming at them, especially from any kind of venue that publishes science fiction, fantasy, horror stuff. You've got a slush pile. You've got tons and tons and tons. So to take time out of your day to write a letter like that, and to say, and resubmitting is usually a taboo. You do that normally, and they're just like, oh God, it's this guy again. But when they invite you to do it, I danced a jig for him. I was like, this is great. This is better. This is almost as good as an acceptance letter. And it's a damn sight better than just this is the nicest rejection letter you're ever going to get. And, he never resubmitted it.
Oh.
He never resubmitted it. And part of it was just because, in my opinion, I think it was because they hadn't accepted it in the first place. It was, in his mind, he saw huge rejection letter, tiny little, this is the good things about it. And some people, you have to, if you're going to do that for a living, if you're going to do anything where you're sticking yourself, you're opening your guts up, opening your chest up and saying, hey, come take a look in here, peek around some. You have to be ready for someone to have some cold fingers every once in a while and kind of jab you the wrong way. And that's my biggest advice is don't give up and don't get discouraged. You're going to get discouraged, but when that happens, try to summon something out of that discouragement and then take one more step. Just keep going. If you write up, and I know, when you're working 2 or 3 jobs, I know this. You're working a bunch of jobs and you're dog tired and you got to take care of the kids and get them up in the morning and one of them's sick and, there's a power bill is going to be disconnected and, you've got all this stuff. Just write one paragraph. Just write one paragraph and it'll build and it'll build. Don't give up. If you really want it, don't give up because you'll end up with something beautiful. And even if it never, ever sees publication, and these days you can publish yourself. I recommend you get yourself a really good editor. And,
Yes.
Basically, there's a lot of stuff that's self-published that probably should not be out there. But there's a whole new route for people now. You can self-publish, but if you want to go traditional publishing, it can happen. You just have to be determined, and you have to just have that endurance. Endurance is the most important thing for so much in life, and I really think that's my best advice is just don't give up. If you really want it, don't give up.
That's great advice. So are there novels or nonfiction books that you've read in the last year or two that made an impact on you and that you would recommend?
Wow. Let me see. Actually, I got asked this like last week, I think, which is cool. I mean, it's a good question. It makes me think a little bit. I tend to read a lot based on what I'm working on. I do have one recommendation. Actually, I have a couple of recommendations. I've really been enjoying the Thief Taker series by D.B. Jackson. Gentleman's name is David Coe. He is a wonderful writer, and I've really enjoyed his books. I think he's up to like 4 in the series right now. It's a detective story. It's a fantasy. It's set in pre-Revolutionary War Boston, in a world where magic works. And his main character is a thief taker, which was a job that is kind of part private investigator, part leg breaker, and part bounty hunter. You could, if you were a gentleman and someone had done you wrong, you could employ a thief taker to seek them out and act as your agent of retribution. And it was completely legal. So it's a great series. I think people should check it out, and can't say enough nice things about it. Another book I read this last year was from full disclosure, dear friend of mine. Well, David's a friend of mine too, but this is another local. He lives in the same town I do, Roanoke, Virginia. A gentleman by the name of Mike Allen had his first novel come out. It's called The Blackfire Concerto. If you are a big fan of say 70s Roger Zelazny or Michael Moorcock, I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a very dark fantasy set in a very bizarre world, and very cool. I loved it. It's a great first novel. It's a great novel. It is creepy and scary, and I think he's working on a second one now, if I'm not mistaken. I would highly recommend that. Also, friend of mine and another great writer. I think this was his first book as well. Is Brian Scott Stavely, the Emperor's Blades. That's an excellent book. It reminds me a little. It's got a little bit of a low fantasy kind of feel to it, and he threw in some very cool kind of cultures. Um, it's got just some neat stuff. It's basically got almost like a kind of a Zen monastery kind of aspect to it. At one point, they have another part where I'm reading about these guys training for this kind of elite cadre of warriors. They fly on giant birds, and as I'm reading about their training, I suddenly realize this is Navy SEAL training they're going through. Basically, they're not running around with a telephone pole, but it's something close to that.
Yeah.
And it's just he took a lot of things that are sort of modern, not really modern aesthetics, but non-traditional. It's not the kind of thing you would normally see in a high fantasy.
Right.
And there's a lot of politics in it, which I think will appeal to folks who enjoy things like, say, Game of Thrones and stuff like that. I really recommend. I mean, I read Mike's book and Scott's book to do a blurb for them, and I was so delighted. It was just it's really fun. Especially, I love first books. I really like reading the first books from someone because you see so many things that are kind of like sort of intrinsic to their writing voice in them, and it's really cool to. I would highly recommend those. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Most of the stuff I've been reading right now has been about one percenter bikers and urban myths from truck drivers and stuff like that. That has to do with the thing I'm writing right now for Tor. So I mean, they're good books. They're good to read. I read a book called Killer on the Road, which is a very interesting book about the development of the interstate highway system and how it relates to serial killers. And it's really a fascinating book. It kind of hit a lot of the things that I had been curious about, and like I said again, this is all stuff related to Brotherhood of the Wheel, which is what I'm writing right now for Tor, and so that's pretty much. I think that's my reading list is basically serial killers, and Mike has cannibals in his book, and let's see.
So the book that you just mentioned, is that a new novel or is that a novella? What's that you're working on?
Well, I have this book called Nightwise that comes out in August of 2015. Nightwise is basically it is urban fantasy, but I tried to make it more almost like a kind of like a dark fantasy noir kind of thing. It's a detective story. Well, it's a supernatural detective story, and a little bit of a caper book. It's very NC-17, and but I'm very proud of it, and it's something I'm looking forward to seeing what people think of it. And there was a character in Nightwise that pops up for just a few minutes, and actually, full disclosure, I think your listeners will be the first to know this, is this character actually shows up in the first novel that I never got published. He was just a minor character. He's in like a chapter or two in that novel from a million years ago. Mm-hmm. And he shows up in a chapter in Nightwise. And then my editor, or my agent, Lucy Ann Diver, Lucy Ann loved that character. She thought he was really cool. The idea behind him was very cool. And said, "Could you write some more about this guy?" And I was like, "Yeah, I could. Oh, yeah, I could write a bunch about this. This is fun." So Lucy Ann did her wonderful magical thing that she does, and she talked with the good folks at Tor, and they were interested in maybe doing a series. So they have purchased the first book in what will hopefully be a series. It's called The Brotherhood of the Wheel. It is basically the basic premise of it is. The original commission of the Knights Templar, before they got rich and famous and had like a VH1 behind the music story, and got persecuted and fell to their excesses and all that other stuff. The very kind of humble origins of the Knights Templar were they were to guard the roadways through the Holy Land. They were to protect pilgrims and merchants, so that commerce could happen and scholars and the faithful could move between the different locations in the Holy Land. The whole premise of my book was, after I did a little reading on the Templars like a million years ago, and thought that was really a neat idea that they were out there kind of patrolling the roads, is I have basically a small sort of a surviving offshoot of the Knights Templar that are called the Brethren, who are 1%er bikers and long haul truck drivers. That old couple you see riding around in the Winnebago, they might be brethren. And the caravanners, the folks who travel from state to state, and the families, the kind of traditional families that travel from state to state in RVs and stuff like that. A lot of them, state troopers, a lot of them are members of the Brethren, and their job is to keep the highways, it's their original job, keep the passageways of civilization safe so that people can move from place to place safely. And of course, to make that really exciting and make it fantasy, the highway system, for some mysterious reason that you will discover if you read along in the books, attracts these horrific entities, human and inhuman, at the fringes of it, that can tend to prey on the people who wander the highways in America. So you have the wandering hitchhiker killers and the serial murderers who use the highways as abduction sites and dumping sites. And you have all forms of kind of monsters, basically all the kind of urban myths that you heard surrounding the highway. Those things are real. And these guys are out there, protecting civilization at the kind of the greasy edges. And I have to admit, it has been an enormous amount of fun to write. I'm finishing up the first manuscript now. It will be published by Tor in 2016, and I'm very excited to be doing it. And I'm hoping that if it is well received, that there'll be some more Brotherhood books. That would be kind of awesome. So, but cool. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy Southern Gothic stuff, and I really kind of enjoy sort of, I don't really know what to call it, kind of redneck mysticism. I really kind of like that stuff a lot. So it tends to be what I write about at the present time. I got some other things I'm kicking around, but this seems to be my cause celeb right now. So
sure. Well, if someone is interested in listening to this interview and wants to learn more about you and your books, where can they find you online?
Thank you. I'm always happy to talk to folks. I love to hear from folks. Like I said, you read my stuff and you like it or don't like it, either way, I love to hear from you. You can reach me. My website is going through a little bit of a metamorphosis right now, so I'm not going to give you a website address because it's changing.
Okay.
But I can give you. I'm on Facebook under author R S Belcher. There's also a page currently for the Six Gun Tarot and for the Shotgun Arcana on Facebook. I have a Twitter account, which is also author R S Belcher. And let's see, I think that's, and my agent's constantly, threatening me with death and dismemberment if I don't tweet more. But I'm an old guy, and it takes me a while to figure out how to use this stuff. Sure. So, as evidenced by my headphones not working when we were trying to get this interview going.
Yeah. Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with R S Belcher, author of the Six Gun Tarot, and his latest novel is the Shotgun Arcana. Both books are in bookstores now, so grab a copy or buy the ebook. And Rod, thanks for doing this interview.
Oh, Jeff, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The stockings are hung and the shopping has begun. This holiday season, shop Cincinnati favorite gift cards at Kroger. Grab a gift card to La Rosa's and enjoy a warm slice of pizza. Or snag a gift card to Grater's and treat yourself to something sweet. Whoever you're shopping for, you'll earn 4 times fuel points on Cincinnati favorite gift cards. Head over to giftcards.kroger.com/Cincinnati-favorites to complete your shopping list and support our local businesses. Available in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Louisville markets only. Restrictions apply. See website for details.